So let's say you happen to be, oh, I don't know, in California, because it's an environment that I'm very familiar with. Um, what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a little landscape drawing here. I'm going to have a hillside coming down. There's another kind of hill back here, and that has a few little valleys tucked away into it. All right, if that's going to be where my drawing is, we'll see if I can zoom a step more and get that centered. There we are. So what I've done is I've just sort of drawn lightly. I've got a hillside coming down here. There's a distant hillside back there. I think I want to raise my sky a little bit so that I don't have right there in the middle of my picture a horizon line that separates my picture in half. So generally speaking, compositionally, it's going to be a lot better. You see how I started off with my horizon line right there? And it was the same amount of sky as ground down here. Sky, ground, same. So when you do that, your composition just will end up looking a little bit off, a little bit funky later on, and you'll be sad. So what I'm going to do now is populate this little drawing with a few clumps of distant oak trees. I'm actually going to draw one distant oak tree. And then the rest of them will be little lumpy fast shapes that are going to make somebody think that they are seeing oak trees. So here is what I'm going to do. I'm going to have over here, over in this area, there will be an oak tree over here. And then going back here on this hillside, actually maybe I want a clump of trees coming down behind this hillside here. Maybe I'll stick in another tree right in here. So what I'm doing is, if I were out in a real landscape, I would be looking at the real landscape and sort of trying to figure out, where I'm going to magically put in trees. I'm going to have some trees back here in this little slot and some distant trees kind of over in here. So at the start of a drawing, I'm lightly, if you're thinking to yourself, this is really pretty light. I start my drawings off intentionally lightly, so that I can move things around and think about composition. And if I'm drawing in a real landscape, I'm also comparing how I'm getting things down here to that real landscape. You can see I've got a tree over here, I've got a tree over here. There's going to be some trees back here, some trees back here. And I want these to look like oak trees. Here is, I'm going to bop up here for just a moment. Here's what I want to avoid. Right? The universal symbol for this is a tree, right? With sort of a bumpy, evenly spaced cloud edge, right? That's not going to really look very tree-ish. So to get this to my first little tree here, I want to, again, it helps so much if there's a real tree to look at, but on my imaginary tree here, I'm going to have an edge. I'm going to have an edge that is going to be intentionally irregular. I've got a bump. I don't want a bunch of bumps that are all the same size. And I'm going to give it a rather flat bottom because here in California, when we let cows into areas where there are trees, they trim all the branches off at one height here. See a little bit of a trunk coming down from underneath that. Now I want this to look like a distant tree. Again, if I get in here and start now drawing leaves, oh, it's not going to work out well for you. This just, you really are going to, you're going to get, first of all, sick of drawing trees and you want to just leave it alone. But also this mass will, you really can't see trees from this leaves from this distance. So instead, I'm going to think of what are the big masses of stuff in this tree? What are the big clumps of leaves? You know how a branch comes out and the branch branches and then the branches branch so that there's all this sort of branching going on where the branches branch, right? That means that where this branch comes out, there will be some sort of a cluster of leaves hanging off here. Where this one branches out, there is going to be another one here. And these things all together make a big clump that will be visually distinct from the other branch that's coming out over here and is making another little thing. So in trees, there will be clumps. And I want to, from this distance, that's what I'm drawing. I'm drawing not the leaves, but the clumps of leaves. So I'm going to assign some clump locations in this tree. As I'm looking at the real tree, I'm saying, real tree, where are your clumps? On my imaginary tree, what I'm going to try to do is just avoid having all my clumps be the same size. You've heard me say it before, and I'll say it again. Consistently inconsistent. So I'm going to have a clump that is going to come across here. That's clump number 1. I'm going to have clump number 2 sticking up here. I'm going to have a third one here. All right, so I've got some clumps of some different sizes. Now, let's think about what the light is doing in this drawing. I'm going to say that my sun is up here, so sunlight is going to be coming into my drawing at an angle like this. This side of the tree is going to be in light. This side of the tree is going to be in shade. If I had a ball somewhere, that would mean that depending on the light angle, I would have a shadow somewhere over here, or if I move the light more to the back, that line between light and dark, which actually has a really cool name, that's the terminator. So the terminator will be right halfway through. Often when you make your terminator halfway through a drawing, it can be visually confusing to people because it can still look like a circle with half black and half white. But the minute you curve it, people will start to see spheres. So I'm going to avoid the terminator being halfway through. And I'm going to actually go a little bit more this way, all right? So I'm going to say that the sun is back behind us here. So instead of coming straight down from the side, you can think of the light now coming. Here's a little cone arrow to suggest that the light is coming from the back a little bit more. All right, that will give you shadows more like this. So what would that do on this clump? This clump is going to get shadow in here. This clump is going to get shadow in here. This clump back here is going to get shadow like that. And this one right here, it's going to get shadow in there. So what I'm getting are these sort of crescents of light across the top of the tree. Here it looks like the tree is floating magically in space. So I'm going to ground that shadow. Maybe even put a cow under the tree. Right. So there is a distant tree. What's going to happen is if I have little tree-shaped lumps in the background, everybody's going to see this thing with a trunk on it, and they will go like, oh, those are trees. Those are trees. I get it. Those are trees. So because this is kind of clearly a tree here, everybody else is going to go like, ah, those are trees. By the way, everybody kind of clear on the fact that we could have had that tree going like this with a few clumps. Oh, let's get this in the screen here. All right, and if I had made the sun position in a different location, we would have gotten different sorts of shadows going on that tree. But it would still kind of look like a tree. I've just kind of tilted my sun angle back. So you don't have to have the sun in this position here. Okay. So you can rotate your sun around different ways. But I really like to think of those clumps. I first divide my tree into clumps, and then I figure out what is the light doing on each of those clumps. If I have the same general idea for lighting on those clumps, it will feel like there's a consistent sun direction. And then the shadow on this tree is going to come out this way a little bit more because the light is from behind it. Let's put some more distant oaks back here. Again, another day we'll play with coniferous trees. All right. I'm going to put one more tree in here. Again, consistently inconsistent. And then I'm going to have an edge back here. There's more trees kind of going in forested area up on the side of the slope. There is a grassy slope here that is cutting off your view of most of that. So I'm not going to have these ones, all of those come down. There's a little kind of zone of trees coming out here in front, but the most of these are going to be behind this. So again, in here, let's say this is clump number 1, clump number 2, clump number 3. Right. And then back here, I'm going to think of like what are the major kind of clumps of trees that I'm seeing back here. And I'm going to be kind of just inserting these little crescents of light. I want there to be these little crescents, like the crescent moon of light. Back here. So you see what I'm doing is I'm drawing these trees and not so much drawing the trees, but by drawing the clumps of shadow across those. Closer. You see how you see this and you go like, oh yes, all of this is trees, because you see this one here at the trunk. You see a little bit of trunkness coming down here. This cues everybody that this weird thing here, if you just saw this, you might be, let me just block this stuff out. There it is on the screen. You just see this, you know, what are we? It's like, it's a marshmallow blob monster attacking, right? But the minute there's that attached to it, you go like, oh, those are trees. I get it. Those are trees. Back out a bit. There are some even further distant trees back here. And they are kind of coming up in a gully here. And on these distant trees back here, all I'm going to do is this. Just that they're an area of tone. And then maybe I'm going to draw one little tree here, suggest that this is a tree. You see this in front of this, and then people go like, oh, that's a bunch of distant trees back there. There's a hillside that comes in here. And might have one more little group of trees here. You may wonder why I'm using this blue pencil. I've been testing out different types of lead, trying to get something kind of dark and things I can put in a mechanical pencil. And so I just think it looks kind of cool. And also, have you seen Tim Pond's work? Oh man, he like really motivates me to kind of mess around with a blue pencil. So this is me trying to be Tim Pond. Wonderful workshop he did today.
Yeah, can you zoom out just a little bit? I think
Let's zoom out.
We can't see the whole landscape. Thank you.
Here is the. So we get this sort of sense that they're trees, and notice that there is no leaf drawn anywhere on these trees. So that might be, let me kind of mess with these hillsides a little bit. If the sun is coming like that, there actually might be some shadows starting to be cast on some of these hillsides. If I'm going to do that, notice I've got these lines down here that are horizontal. If I put any marks on these hillsides, I'm going to tilt those lines and have them suggest a slope. So let's say there is lines sort of by having those lines at an angle, these ones back here fanning around this bowl. So they're starting here and then lines coming up this way and then up this way. And then maybe there's some, let's see, I often turn my paper around as I'm drawing, but I realize that just makes everybody out there seasick. So I'm going to try to do that less. So if I do choose, it was fine not having those. It would have been sort of like more bright, dry, grassy. If I want more value in there, then marks that I do put on those hillsides, let's zoom in that for a moment. Those lines follow, kind of suggest that there's a change in contour here. Here in this valley, I'm starting off with lines coming this way, and then as I turn around, the back of the valley coming straight up. Essentially what I'm doing there, my slinky. Here's my slinky. All right. Notice that on this side, these lines are curved. Just to pay attention to only the top half of the slinky. All right. So here's the back of the middle of the bowl, lines coming. Let's see. Come on, slinky. There we go. There we go. These lines curve this way. These lines curve down. These lines come in at an angle like that. That's because this is making a bowl around the back. So these lines coming like this, these lines coming straighter down here, these lines coming in this way suggests that we're kind of, you're looking out into a bowl. Right.
Jack, would you zoom out just a little bit so we can see the whole? Thank you.
So that is a little bit of distant oak trees. Future class, we're going to do a deep dive on coniferous trees. But since we're just sort of here in oak tree land, I wanted to just do a little bit of a thing of suggesting, kind of get closer with the leaves and show a little bit about texture, drawing texture on those. Also about how you might kind of frame in. Unfortunately, I don't have an oak tree leaf that I can put here as an example, but I'm going to show you how I might go about initially sketching a leaf, and then we'll get some texture on that leaf. And we're going to give that leaf some bumps and divots, and we'll help you sort of think about how do you show the difference between a bump and a divot on any surface, be it you drawing a leaf or an insect. Right, now if I have a leaf, let's say I've got a pinnately lobed leaf, so that is one with a central stalk, and there are lobes that are coming out from it. All right, a good way to do that is first just to lightly draw an oval that is going to kind of block in the basic shape of your leaf. So the leaf is going to be about this tall, it's going to be about this wide. It's going to narrow a little bit towards the top. And now I'm going to put in that it has a central stalk here. This is intentionally done really ghosty light. Now I'm going to put in its lobes. It's going to have a central lobe sticking up in here. It's going to have another lobe that sticks out here. And it's going to have another lobe that is going to stick out here. And so I'm going to get sort of blocking in the locations of those lobes. And if I had a rather simple leaf, I'm going to just draw this a little bit darker. You know, you can come along and then kind of say, like, here's my leaf. But we're going to make this one a little bit more interesting. So on this lobe here, there's going to be lobes on this lobe. There's going to be a lobe sticking out the top of it. There's a lobe here. So you see now I'm kind of getting into this part here. I'm going to draw a little bit more heavily so it's easier to see. This lobe has a 3 lobe.
Jack, just so that you know, it's really hard to see the really light circles that you've placed, so it looks invisible on the screen.
All right, here's what I've got going on. Is that a little bit better?
Yeah, that's better. Thank you.
So again, starting whatever you're doing lightly is a really good idea. All right, then let's say this one here has a lobe that sticks up. And there's another little lobe here. This one has a more of a major lobe here and a minor lobe here. And this one is going to be a single lobe. So what I'm doing is just sort of figuring out how many lobes my lobes have and balling those in with no detail. Then I'm going to take a look at the tips of my lobes. My lobes on this are going to kind of go out to fine points, like on a black oak. And so what I can do now is I'm going to start looking at negative shapes. What is the negative shape between, say, this lobe and this lobe? What is the shape of the air that is right in here? That's going to help me carve this. It's going to have some nice negative shapes in these areas. So I'm going to look at what those are. This one is going to be skinnier. All right, so I'm looking at those shapes, and that allows me to kind of block in this shape a little bit more easily. Now I can come along and draw in whatever those edges are doing. And I now can just be worried about the edge of this thing instead of how do I make this shape in this line, and where does this lobe go? I've already figured out where all of these lobes go. And I don't have a real leaf in front of me, so I'm just making this one up. But you can see some sort of leafiness to that. Then what I would do is figure out this vein that I'm putting in the middle here. It's going to come up here, and as it gets towards the edge, it's going to peter out and not really clearly get all the way there. I've got another vein that's going to come out here. What you want to do when you're putting in veins is take a look along the mid vein and see what is the angle that these veins come out and how far do they do. So if I'm working on this vein, does it start here and come out more straight, or does it start lower down and come up at more of an angle? That's a thing that you can easily measure by looking at your leaf and just kind of trace it back. Okay, that one's going to start this far back. And then what is the angle? So if this is the main vein, what is the angle that the vein is coming out at? Does it come out straight and then curve? All right. Very often you'll see that the veins will come down, and they won't. Sometimes they'll go straight in like this. Very often, though, you'll see them kind of come down and just sort of turn more into it. So they come into it at a more perpendicular angle. So pay attention to what is your attachment angle and how far down does that go. And then this is going to point out here. It's going to point out here. You want veins to lead to the points on leaves. If your plant has points on it, right, there will be veins that each one of those will be supplied by a vein. So you'll be able to trace back from this point here, right, that's the vein here. So this one here, this lobe is going to have a major vein that supplies it. So where back in here does, relative to this, is that vein supplied from here, here, here? The answer is going to be in your leaf. So I'm going to look at where that goes and say, well, this one's going to come somewhere in here, right? And then it's going to come out here. I know that there's going to be something that's going to branch off to this, something is going to branch off to this, something's going to branch off to that. This one over here. And all the answers, you don't have to, there's nothing you have to memorize. You just want to look at the real leaf that's in front of you and figure out where in this craziness does this come in. And sometimes there'll be little things that'll just kind of come off. If you want to avoid the vain attempt to just generalize it and kind of go on autopilot with your veins. The veins are going to, for different plants, they're going to have their own angles off of here and different degrees of, let's see what this one is going to, it's going to come in like that. And there's actually going to be, this is going to be powered by its own separate little vein. All right. So all the answers are on the real leaf. Now, I am going to take this leaf. Oh, and also let me just say, is there anything wrong with just taking your leaf, putting it down on your piece of paper and kind of tracing around it? No, there's nothing at all wrong with doing that. If you want to put a leaf on your paper and trace around the leaf, you can. I do recommend when you trace is, let's say my hand is my leaf, rather than, let me back up for just a little tracing tutorial here. You're thinking, I know how to do this, but just hang on a second. Instead of doing a hard line like that, it's hard to do because your leaf, as you press against the side, your leaf is going to move. You start pressing on the side of the leaf edge and the leaf is going to kind of move and kind of wobble, and you'll get this wobbly edge. So on tracing something that is light, what I do is I just kind of don't press in on the side. I'm just going to make a few little kind of light marks, especially at kind of key points. All right, and then see those little dots I made? Then you get to come along with your own line, and you can make that get lighter or darker as you see fit. So you're just going to put in a few little kind of tracing placeholders at key points along it. Sometimes you can even draw a little line. If there's a big flat surface, you can kind of get in there and do that. Sort of lightly suggest that. And then be able to come back in and figure out what that shape is. There's no, like, don't think like I'm not a real nature journaler if I traced a leaf. You can make leaf rubbings. On another class, I'll show you some tricks on making leaf rubbings and leaf prints, where you put some paint on the side of a leaf and use that as a stamp in your journal. But you also, at times, you're going to want to be able to freehand draw those things. So that's what we're really messing with here. But so here's a little bit of a leaf. I'm going to get a little bit of color on this leaf, and then we'll put some bumps and divots on it. All right, so there's my leaf. Oh, and you wonder, why don't you finish this? Doesn't your brain want that to be finished? It's kind of cool. On your drawings, if you leave parts of the drawing unfinished, it actually adds a lot of visual interest to it. You can kind of get in there and see the process of what was done to make that. And you're like, oh, like, and the people's brains are going to like, oh, please just like do that part there, and their brain's going to start doing that. It adds a lot of kind of cool visual interest, and also makes your drawings faster if you don't have to finish the whole thing. Like on the watercolor, I'm not going to do the whole thing. I'm going to have part of it watercolored in, and you'll see that your brain will fill in the rest. And incomplete drawings really look cool. Incomplete drawings are just cool, right? So I am going to start. I'm going to zoom back so you can see my watercolor palette. All right. I'm going to start with some light green. I want it to be lighter, a little bit more yellow. Now, if you notice, I've got yellow there in that corner of my palette. I can dip into yellow paint here without getting this dirty. The big thing you don't want to do is take a gunky green brush and dip it into that yellow. That is not good. Right, so as I start to paint this, I'm going to zoom in where I'm painting. Watch how my brush tip will tickle the edge of the leaf, and I can be sloppy in the interior. When I get, so I can be like do 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 do, and then it comes along here. I bring my tip of my brush up there. So I was using the tip along that edge there. And notice how I'm also dragging the brush. I'm not pushing the brush. I'm pulling the brush. When I pull the brush, it tends to fan out irregularly. So along this edge here, I take the tip of it and I bring that in there. If I have a large leaf with a lot of space to cover, I will often paint it in sections. And I'll do those sections along the lines of the veins. Then later on, if those little separations between those sections show up slightly, you sometimes do get natural color variations in between little vein zones, or sometimes there's a change in how the light strikes it. So if this ends up, sometimes when you pause a paintbrush stroke and you kind of work over here while this is drying, you'll get a little line in there showing up. And I don't mind if that happens here. Look kind of cool. So I'm going to tickle the edge with the brush tip. Bring that down in here. If I come in here with a slightly different color of green, you know, sometimes you try to remix a color and you get something slightly different. If those are along edges of zones, little leaf zones, that ends up looking kind of cool. Actually, I'm going to intentionally do that here. I would, above all, just really look at the leaf that you have and see what it's doing. In fall, you'll see color changes will also often happen in a patchy way inside these zones. Now I'm going to let this dry. So I'm going to do one more thing in here. I'm going to put some in here. And just fade that out. Oh, got to stay on the screen. All right, I'm going to let this dry while we talk a little bit about divots and the divot and the pimple. Here's the surface. Here is the bottom, the substrate of it. All right, here's your surface. This is the substrate. So if it's a bump that comes up like this, all right, it is going to appear different than a divot going down into it. If light is coming at a glancing angle here, right? And sort of consider light rays coming in parallel to each other because the sun is far away. Right? What that does on this surface here of, let me zoom a little bit more. What's that going to do on this little surface right here of this pimple sticking up? This surface that is facing towards the light is going to get sun, and the side that is facing away is going to be in darkness and shade. But on this here, down in here, this side of the divot gets direct sunlight, while this side ends up in shade. So this side of the divot gets shade, this side of the divot gets light. You see how the sun comes straight down in here and it misses this wall. If the sunlight is coming from straight down, you cannot see any contour. You can't see the difference between a divot and a dimple. All right. So if I am now looking at this surface from the top, and light was coming in this direction, if this was one bump and this was the other, then what it's going to do on the one that's sticking up is it's going to have a shadow here. And over here on the one that's sticking down, it's going to have a shadow on the opposite side. So here, here's my surface. I'm getting a bright highlight out of this side of my object. I'm getting a bright highlight out of this side of the object. Now, if I were to turn this paper upside down, you notice that, all right, there's no real way that in this drawing that I am indicating which one is a divot and which one is a dimple, because the light could, if the light on this drawing were coming from this side, then this becomes my divot and this becomes my bump. The bump will stick up and catch the light. But if the light is coming this direction, then this side will be in shadow and this side will be in light. So do you see how if I just have a drawing on its own and I'll say to somebody, is this a divot or a bump? There's no clue that you have, because I could say, like, if you say, oh, that's a bump, right? Because the light is going here, I could say, ha, no, it's not. No, the light's actually coming from here. I tricked you. My light's over here, right? There's no visual clue in this drawing which way that is going. So what I have to do is on the big drawing, if I'm going to be doing divots and dimples, I have to have some other clue to somebody which way the sun is coming from. So a really good way of doing that is just on your leaf drawing, put in a little shadow. Now it's going to be clear that my light on my drawing is coming from this side so that it casts a shadow out this way. And if I want this part to be really far away from the paper, I'm going to have, like, let's say it's sticking up. Then there's a big gap between the shadow and the paper. And the closer the shadow gets, that means the closer the object is coming down to the paper. So that would be a suggestion that this part is really sticking up more than this. And similarly, if over here I have the shadow right like this, then that suggests that this part is close to the paper. So this would be sticking up from the paper. But all of these are consistent with a shadow direction with my light coming down this way. So now, if I have a divot or a dimple on my piece of paper, people will know which direction the light is coming from. So I can make it a divot or a dimple. So I'm going to just put a, let's say I wanted these veins to be, sometimes on the surface of a leaf. I'm going to draw this from the side. A vein will actually have a groove on the top surface, and on the bottom surface, it will stick out. So this would be, if I'm looking at the top side of the leaf, there would be a little dimple, a little groove in that area. If I'm looking at the bottom surface, it would be sticking up. So if I flopped my leaf over, I would have this vein sticking up. So let's say I want these veins to be sticking up. My light is coming in from this direction. Actually, let's see. So if I draw actually a line between this tip and this tip, yeah, it's generally speaking, yeah, my light is going to be in this direction. I want that one to be a little bit longer. Hold on. There. So that means if there is, so just like you see there's a shadow on this side of my finger, if I have a vein sticking up, the shadow is going to be on this side. If light's coming from in on this way, there's a shadow side of the vein. And down here, you see on the leaf surface, that shadow cast by the vein. So if I want the vein to be a ridge, I'm going to put a little hint of a shadow on one side of it. This right over here, if there's my vein, a little bit of a shadow, suggesting that that vein is sticking up. By the way, if the vein is flush with the surface, then I would not be doing this. Then I can take my favorite white gel pen and draw in that vein with the shadow next to it. You notice I'm starting to draw these veins coming out here, and then I'm tapping it with my finger. When I'm tapping it with my finger, I'm getting some of that white gel pen ink off on my finger. So I want it to fade.
Jack, I'm just giving you a time check. It's 1:02 right now.
Wow, time flies.
And if you can adjust your screen image so we could see the full
Ah,
leaf, that would be helpful. Thank you.
right. So some of these are a little bit too harsh, like up in here. So I just take a damp brush and I lightly stroke that and it kicks it back. I can also take a color like yellow, yellow-green here, and come along and tint that vein lightly. And now, so that was sticking up. I am going to make, let's say there is a, so this was, I'm going to make just out here in this leaf section, I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to make a bump and a depression, right? So, off in this zone here, I want there to be a little bit of a bump and a little bit of a depression. So if I want there to be something sticking up slightly, I am, let's say there is, I'm going to put in a shadow going this way. If there's a depression on it, it's going to be a shadow going this way. And then each of those gets a little highlight. So I hope that this paper is dry enough for me to be able to write on it with a white pencil here. If so, I'll be able to put, no, it's not. I'm going to just hit this with a hairdryer really fast.
If you're in the studio, you can have a hairdryer handy. If you're out in the sun, turn your sketchbook to face the sun, and your paper dries out much more quickly. So often hold my paper up to the sun just to get that sort of it
To dry out. Thank you for that time check. I completely lost track of time. I'm going to put in a very, oops, kind of pale area here. I want that to be brighter. And I'm going to soften that edge. So this can give me a sense that there is a little bit of a bump sticking up. And this one, a little bit of a depression. It also helps if you're doing something like this to have some place in the drawing where you twist the leaf and people are able to sort of see the side, and you can sort of show that, oh, there are bumps sticking up. So when you have a place where you do have bumps, that helps this read a little bit more easily. Right. Those are a handful of tricks drawing let's zoom out from this. There we go. Minus. A depression, by the way, on a smaller scale, if I wanted there to be, just little tiny divots on this leaf. Actually, I'm going to do little bumps. What I would do is I would make little tiny marks, but on a very micro scale, I'm moving my pencil in a curve. Need a sharper pencil. I think I still need to dry this paper a little bit more. It's very hard to draw on even slightly damp paper with a pencil, because your pencil ends up just pushing into the paper rather than making a mark. All right, so here's just a little bit of drawing a leaf, of drawing a landscape with distant trees. Now I'm just going to give this thing some spots. There we are. And I hope that there are some ideas and strategies that were useful to you in here. There we are. Just gonna lighten that. Whoa, kind of obliterated that one, but I guess I'll be okay with that.